Episode number 59. Meanwhile, the young woman had turned off into a side street, but Kay could do without her now, and let his companions lead him. All three of them now, in complete agreement, went over a bridge in the light of the moon. The two gentlemen were willing to yield to each little movement made by Kay as he moved slightly towards the edge, and directed the group in that direction as a single unit. The moonlight glittered and quivered in the water, which divided itself around a small island covered in a densely piled mass of foliage, and trees and bushes. Beneath them, now invisible, there were gravel paths with comfortable benches, where Kay had stretched himself out on many summer's days. "I didn't actually want to stop here," he said to his companions, shamed by their compliance with his wishes. Behind K's back one of them seemed to quietly criticize the other for the misunderstanding about stopping, and then they went on. They went on up through several streets, where policemen were walking, or standing here and there, some in the distance and then some very close. One of them with a bush mustache, his hand on the grip of his sword, seemed to have some purpose in approaching the group, which was hardly unsuspicious. The two gentlemen stopped. The policeman seemed about to open his mouth, and then Kay drove his group forcefully forward. Several times he looked back cautiously to see if the policeman was following, but when they had a corner between themselves and the policeman, Kay began to run, and the two gentlemen, despite being seriously short of breath, had to run with him. In this way they quickly left the built-up area, and found themselves in the fields which, in this part of town, began almost without a transition zone. There was a quarry, empty and abandoned, near a building, which was still like those in the city. Here the men stopped, perhaps because this had always been their destination, or perhaps because they were too exhausted to run further. Here they released their hold on Kay, who just waited in silence, and took their top hats off, while they looked round the quarry, and wiped the sweat off their brows with their handkerchiefs. The moonlight lay everywhere with the natural peace that is granted to no other light. After exchanging a few courtesies about who was to carry out the next tasks, the gentlemen did not seem to have been allocated specific functions. One of them went to Kay and took his coat, his waistcoat, and finally his shirt off him. Kay made an involuntary shiver, at which the gentleman gave him a gentle, reassuring tap on the back. Then he carefully folded the things up as if they would still be needed, even if not in the near future. He did not want to expose Kay to the chilly night air without moving though, so he took him under the arm, and walked up and down with him a little way, while the other gentleman looked round the quarry for a suitable place. When he had found it he made a sign and the other gentleman escorted him there. It was near the rock face. There was a stone lying there that had broken loose. The gentleman sat Kay down on the ground, leant him against the stone, and settled his head down on the top of it. Despite all the effort they went to, and despite all the cooperation shown by Kay, his demeanor seemed very forced, and hard to believe. So one of the gentlemen asked the other to grant him a short time, while he put Kay in position by himself, but even that did nothing to make it better. In the end they left Kay in a position that was far from the best of the ones they had tried so far. Then one of the gentlemen opened his frock coat, and from a sheath hanging on a belt stretched across his waistcoat he withdrew a long, thin, double-edged butcher's knife, which he held up in the light to test its sharpness. The repulsive courtesies began. Once again, one of them passed the knife over Kay to the other, who then passed it back over Kay to the first. Kay now knew it would be his duty to take the knife as it passed from hand to hand above him, and thrust it into himself. But he did not do it. Instead he twisted his neck, which was still free, and looked around. He was not able to show his full worth, was not able to take all the work from the official bodies. He lacked the rest of the strength he needed, and this final shortcoming was the fault of whoever had denied it to him. As he looked round, he saw the top floor of the building next to the quarry. He saw how a light flickered on, and the two halves of a window opened out. Somebody, made weak and thin by the height and the distance, leant suddenly far out from it, and stretched his arms out even further. Who was that? A friend? A good person? Somebody who was taking part? Somebody who wanted to help. Was he alone? Was it everyone? Would anyone help? Were there objections that had been forgotten? There must have been some. The logic cannot be refuted, but someone who wants to live will not resist it. Where was the judge he'd never seen? Where was the high court he had never reached? He raised both hands, and spread out all his fingers.